Okay. So this is Truman Workshop number 4. No, you have been all waiting for this one. This is going to be on the graduate education and future goals. Next week, I think I've committed to doing additional information, the question about courses, and the biographical questions, like questions 1 through 6. And then also I realized I may just do a separate pop-up section, because for the Truman internal application, we ask for a resume, because it's a great way of giving the selection committee insight into kind of your like larger holistic candidacy. And I may do a little pop-up session on the resume, because I have found that not many people know how to do a resume. So we may do that one. Stay tuned, because that will be another one that will be very valuable for you, regardless of what you're applying to. Okay. Maybe I should just ask, are there any kinds of like logistical questions before we jump into this? Like anybody, everyone's good. Deadline's October 26th at noon. You need to submit your part of the application as one PDF, and then your recommenders need to separately be sending their letters with the respective cover letters. The reason we're asking for the cover letters is because it easily identifies what the bucket the letter is in, whether that's leadership, public service, or academic, without us having to guess. Occasionally, sometimes we've gotten like 2 public service letters, and then we have to like figure that out. So that's why the cover letters are particularly important. Okay. So with the graduate education and future goals, and I mentioned this a little bit in the defining your issue webinar, but I want to reflect on this a bit more. With your trajectory and with kind of like thinking about the graduate education piece, it's so critical that you are thinking about what is the ultimate end goal. What kinds of careers or what kinds of organizations are doing the work that I find most interesting? Who are the individuals that I find are doing the kind of work that I really admire? And if I think like if I could be any person, like I would really like to be this kind of person. What is that kind of endpoint? In order to work backwards and then create a blueprint for yourself. As I've said before, it's not like you have to like reinvent everything in putting together that kind of trajectory. There are models that exist, and so that you should certainly be taking advantage of them. In finding those individuals, or starting with the organizations that are doing the interesting work and seeing what individuals work at those organizations, reading their bios that are listed on that kind of organizational page or like that agency page, looking at, okay, what graduate degrees do they have? What is their kind of academic background, and what have they done up into that point of their current position? To help you also determine, does the kind of graduate education or graduate program that I envision for myself, does that match the kind of educational experiences that the person that I'm reading about has? Because if you think like, oh, I think I need to go to medical school because I want to work for kind of like this health department, but then you're reading the bios of people who work in that health department in the kind of office you want to work in, and everyone has an MPH and you're proposing an MD, there might be like kind of a readjustment there, either doing an MD MPH or like shifting to the MPH. So it's going to give you a better sense of what matches the end goal and what makes the most sense for you, because the emphasis here is on the kind of like the logical progression to get to that future aim. Okay, so how do you identify a blueprint? Well, there's good old Google and LinkedIn. This is some good Googling work to track down these kinds of bios. So I have an example here. So say you're someone who's interested in like water security and management. That's kind of your topical field. You've taken kind of courses in the SFS that have looked at water security in some way. You're interested in engaging in this work in the future, but you're like, I have no clue like where this ends up. I just know I'm interested in this kind of like field. But you're like, broadly, you're like, oh, I know like maybe an environmental nonprofit kind of like makes sense for me, or maybe kind of like governmental work. I'm like torn. So you could say like, okay, well, maybe Nature Conservancy, this like nonprofit environmental organization, I think you're all familiar with the Nature Conservancy, like does work that perhaps is like, obviously environmentally related, deals with water in some capacity. Or maybe I'm interested in working for a state agency or even a federal agency. What would that look like? Would that look like EPA? Or perhaps like you're from California, you're like the California Department of Water Resources, like looked up kind of the state offices and agencies, and you think like that also seems like a cool kind of position. So then it would be a matter of looking at the people in those organizations. So we're right now undertaking a matching kind of experience. And I should have like actually pulled up these URLs previously. So let's say like, let's go to like, okay, like Nature Conservancy. I'll show you how I do this. This is kind of like some fun weekend work for you guys. So I'm like Nature Conservancy. I want to see like who are their people who are doing this work. Okay, like here's, you can like, I mean, all these bios are available to read, like the lead scientists, we have like the conservation officers, we have someone who's an ambassador for water. I think under issue experts, though, is probably, see if it's taking time to look at. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to click on the ethics. I'm not interested in going into like the becoming the ethics officer. But I am interested in issue. Am I clicking? Oh, here we go. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, there's the soil scientist, office ambassador of water. Here we go, managing director of water security. So I'm like, let's click on this person and see what she does. Biography. Okay, so we have what she did in her 20 years of experience. Before she came to the Nature Conservancy, she did a master's degree in environmental policy and economic development. So I'm like, okay, so like this, I'm reading this bio, I think like this sounds really awesome. It seems like the kind of work that I'd be interested in doing. I'm gonna like in my spreadsheet, I'm gonna like take note of kind of like what perhaps like the role is now, what kind of the intermediary roles were that she had to get to that point, and then also what the graduate degree that she has. Or I'm like, you know, the California Department of Water Resources, maybe I see myself more in kind of like the governmental role. Well, let's go to like California Department of Water Resources, California, oops, I can't even spell here, Department of Water Resources, okay. I don't want to go to careers, I'm going to go to about. Okay, here we have their executive team and their bios. So let's see, and this person is the chief deputy director. Okay. And she has a master's of art or a bachelor's degree in environmental policy analysis and planning and earned a master's of science degree in conservation biology. So put this in my spreadsheet, thinking about like what bios most resonate with me, tracking what those kind of intermediary positions are, and then seeing like, okay, which one makes the most sense given the kind of background I have, and doing it that way. So that's one way of like thinking through like what might be a match between the future goals, intermediary kind of steps, and the graduate education. You can also then like look these people up on like LinkedIn, like see if like anyone who's in kind of California Department of Water Resources, if that was a kind of like thing that sounded neat to you, look up what their bios are on LinkedIn, because that's obviously probably a better way of getting immediately to like kind of the career progression. But you can also do this work a different way. So there's the work of looking at the organizations, going to like the leadership within that organization, reading the bios, seeing which bios resonate with you, checking out the kind of graduate education of those people and thinking about it that way. Or perhaps you're like, you know what, I just like would love like the masters of, I don't know, like master or MPA in environmental science and policy, environmental science and policy, and start there. Or perhaps you like had looked at these people's bios, you're like, this actually sounds interesting, let me see if that seems like a good fit for me. So then let's start with like the graduate program. Let's find a graduate program like in that field at perhaps a leading institution, and see like, how do they talk about that program, the kind of tools that you're getting with that program, where do their alumni end up? So from my work doing this, perhaps I've seen like, okay, an MA in environmental policy makes sense, or perhaps an MPA in environmental science and policy. So I should have included the links here. So MPA environmental policy, policy Columbia. Okay, oh yeah, because I'd already clicked on it and looked at it. So here I'm on like the kind of graduate website, the Earth Institute at Columbia University that does this MPA in environmental science and policy, which sounds like pretty cool. Here we go, careers. So let's like find out where their alumni, oops, why is my computer working so slowly here? Here we go, alumni network. Do it this way, like see where do their graduates end up, the kind of range careers they end up in. Because if you're looking at this like graduate program and everyone's positions are not ones that you would envision having for yourself, that might be cause to adjust what the graduate program is. So here's kind of like a list of their alums. You can click into like their like ended up at like EPA. I think I pulled out a couple here that like I got from here. So yeah, like C4 Cities, California Coastal Commission, I got from like looking at these future careers, which sounded like interesting to me to see what like these positions are. And I'm like, oh, maybe this sounds like a cool organization that I would like to be doing, like an organization that's committed to bold climate action by thinking about like urban planning and addressing like environmental issues inherent within that. So like perhaps, so then from here, I'm like, let's find out who's on the team. So like, this is just to say there's like lots of different ways of kind of approaching this work, kind of going from the organizational route, looking at individuals, or going from like the graduate program, looking to see where their like alumni end up, and constantly doing this kind of matching process and determining which of these most resonate with me that I might perhaps like use as kind of a model for my own work. So what's great about this work is it's going to allow you to determine, actually open up probably opportunities that you hadn't even considered before of like future careers, and help you determine, okay, like what kinds of graduate programs out there are within kind of like my interest area that I might put down on my application. So I want to try another one because I know there are probably like a lot of people here interested in the ACLU. With these kinds of future plans, I just want to emphasize specificity is so important. And this is why I'm like talking specifically about like looking at people's bios and like thinking about the kind of trajectory, because it's not enough to say like in the future I want to be a civil rights lawyer. Like that's not going to cut it. There are probably, you know, hundreds of other people applying to Truman who are interested in being civil rights lawyers. So we need to know exactly what kind of civil rights lawyer do you want to be? What is the kind of capacity in which you want to work? So this is just to like further underscore the kind of like the reasoning that you're doing this. So if you're like ACLU sounds really cool, get to know like the leadership and organizational chart within that organization. Like think about like, what does it mean to work for the ACLU? Like how do they even structure like their different kind of issue areas? So perhaps you're interested in voting rights. And then you like look up the ACLU like centers and initiatives and find out that there's like a Center for Democracy. And hopefully this works. Does this work? It's gonna let me go in here. Oh, here we go, great. I actually included the link this time. So you find out like ACLU has these like different centers, and the Center of Democracy, working to strengthen American democratic institutions, has a voting rights project as one of their things. And so like that might be super specific to be like, you know, I'm someone who's committed to voting rights. I, in the future, want to work for like leading the voting rights project for the Center of Democracy for the ACLU. As a reviewer, I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, like you've spent time like looking at this, you've reflected on like what is a good match for you, looked up what the person who like currently leads like this center, what her kind of past work is. And this becomes kind of, once again, the intermediary career trajectory to get to this like final goal. So you wouldn't have to like in your kind of discussion about your future career plans, you don't have to get as specific as be like, I want to be the deputy legal director for the Center of Democracy at the ACLU. But you could say like, I'd hope to like lead an initiative, like one of the ACLU's projects specifically, like I'm interested in the voting rights project. So like being as specific as possible, you don't have to like identify like, I don't want to be Cecilia Wang's like exact like position, but getting as specific as possible around that. So this will give you a really great idea of what it takes to get to that kind of position within that organization. so she's the director of the Center of Democracy, but also there's that voting rights project that I mentioned. And then look up what this person's, where do I have a link here? This is the person who directs the voting rights project at the ACLU, or this is the voting rights project. Oh, here we have the director, and like looking up his bio as well. So here's his bio. So like a reasonable career plan for someone like interested in voting rights might be, you know what, I'm going to get my JD. I'm considering this JD program at this institution that specifically has an interest in kind of like civil rights law and has these kinds of clinics that I might participate in. Following like kind of experience, I hope to work as a staff attorney. Like that is kind of like an intermediary thing here. Work as a staff attorney in this kind of capacity, eventually working myself up to senior staff attorney, eventually becoming like the director of like the voting rights project for the ACLU. Awesome. Like I have an immediate sense of the kind of impact here, that you have a reasonable kind of and logical progression that's going to get you to that end goal. Oh my gosh. Is that Amanda? Oh my gosh, guys, this is one of our Truman scholars. I hadn't even prepared this. Amanda is one of our 2018 Truman scholars. I hadn't even like clicked that this was, she was, oh, how fun, guys. Oh, great. So yeah, see, like if this was interesting you should reach out to Amanda and find out what she's doing. So this is great. Just goes to show you why this work is valuable. So she's a paralegal now, but then the kind of like what that trajectory looks like. Oh, how fun. It's so funny. I hadn't even noticed that before. Questions about this so far? Does this all make sense? We're all good? Okay. So a reminder here. So you're doing this work of like Googling, like looking up the people's bios, thinking about like what organization resonates with you, what kind of like graduate program makes sense for those goals. Just a reminder that your policy proposal should be in line with the type of work that you were speaking to in those goals. So if your future work is doing kind of like something related to voting rights, that would be under kind of like the purview of like the voting rights project. It wouldn't make sense in your policy proposal to be talking about like doing like education reform at like the state level and this other kind of capacity. Like you want it to be kind of in line with the work that you envision yourself doing in the future. Does it have to be like exactly within oversight of that kind of future position? No, but it should be kind of like topically related, where once again the reviewer isn't getting whiplash after having just read your career goals in the graduate education and then reading your policy proposal that's talking about something different. So you want that cohesion to always be there. Okay, a note about the career plans. As you've probably been getting the sense and have been talking about this, the logical and specific progression is really important. We need to have a sense that you understand what the kind of like steps here look like. And you do that by doing this kind of research, finding the blueprint, thinking about, is this one that resonates with you? Perhaps like building off your kind of future vision, your future goals around that. You need to indicate what the role will allow you to do or what it will give you. So if I was the kind of person that wanted to do like the voting rights project, become the director at the voting rights project, like even thinking about like how his position is defined, Dale's position is defined here, can give me ideas for how to talk about, actually this is just more about his bio. I probably have to go to this page about the work of the project to talk about what I'm going to be doing. So let's see here. Yeah, so I might, in my kind of future goals piece, if I'm like in the future, in the long term, I want to become like the director of the voting rights project at the ACLU, I can talk about like how I want to, through litigation, challenge policies that are denying voting rights to minorities or like disenfranchising communities, and making sure that communities have the ability to like elect candidates of their choice. So, you know, there's like thinking about how this work is framed, that can also inform how you were talking about your future work as well. Okay, aim high. I say here I wanted to add that the Foreign Service Officer is going to cut it, and an ACL staff attorney is not the long game. So there are many people who envision or like interested in international affairs, like Foreign Service Officer, like that is, I mean, it's a hard position to get to by itself. But as I mentioned, like previously, and even in the info session, like the Foreign Service Officer, that's an important role, but that's not a role that's going to allow you to affect like systemic, like more like systemic change, or like have a more kind of larger oversight of some sort of system. So the Foreign Service Officer would not be the kind of like end goal here. The end goal might be looking at what is a bureau or office within the State Department that you might hope to lead in the future. Like what is that kind of office, or what is that kind of bureau that you imagine like working in? Same thing with the ACLU. Like it will not be enough to just say, I want to be an ACLU attorney, because that's a pretty, like, once again, that's one of those goals that like many other people are going to have. I want to know specifically within like the ACLU, where do you hope to be operating? What do you hope to be kind of like leading or contributing to? That's going to be more of the long game. So you want to have a logical progression, but you also want to have an ambitious progression here. You want to give the Truman Committee a sense of like how you were thinking about affecting change and having an impact in the future. If you are a person who wants to run for Congress, like God bless you, it's not just enough to say, I want to run for Congress, and like that's the end of it. You still need to have some key issues or a platform that you envision kind of animating that future run. So we need to know what those are. So like perhaps like you're committed to kind of like affordable housing is one of your things, or kind of like education. That may be something that you would want to work on within Congress. You would want to be able to say that, like you hope to run to be a congressional representative. You're particularly committed to addressing issues pertaining to affordable housing and education. Like we still need to know like kind of like what your focus area is. Specificity, I will keep on repeating it, is very, very important, because that's what's going to set you apart from other people who might have the same kind of ambitions but are not speaking so specifically and with such focus and clarity about those goals. Questions? Are we all good on this? Everyone's with me? Okay. Feel free to chat questions if you have questions as we're going along. Okay. Now, notes about the graduate education. Okay, so with the graduate education response, you need to have a first choice program and you need to have a second choice program. The second choice program you don't need to talk about nearly as much as the first choice program, but we need to have a sense that you've spent some time thinking through what are the programs that are a best fit for me, what might be like my like ideal program that I would want to pursue, but what would also be like a backup. Like same thing as like if you were applying to like kind of college, probably many have like, you know, like their like dream school, the one that like they think is like the best fit that they're so committed to, but then you also have probably like other kinds of institutions that you were considering. So like say you are committed to that, like as you know, this program, this like math MPA in environmental science and policy at Columbia, you're like, that one makes a lot of sense for me. That's kind of like my first choice here. You write about that one, but then you need to have a second choice. That could be perhaps like maybe you're from like, I don't know, I'll do Colorado because I'm from Colorado. I love Colorado. Maybe like your second choice or like the second program you mentioned would be like University of Colorado's like Masters of Science in Environmental Studies or something. I don't know, actually that was an MPA. So like maybe it's like University of Colorado's Masters in Environmental Policy if they have one. So that might be more perhaps like, it could be like the state institution that you're from, or it could be like another kind of institution, but just to kind of assure the Truman Committee that you've like thought about this and given some thought and research to the programs that are good fit, you have like a couple options. Okay. When talking about the graduate education, it is not enough just to wax poetic about like how much you love the law. Like if you are like, you know, one of these people that's going to the Voting Rights Project at ACLU, I do not want to see an entire response that's just like, the law is the vehicle of affecting change in society and like rights are so important and like I can do that through a JD and like law is the answer. Like that does not give me any information. It's not helpful. I want to know what specifically about that program will enable you to gain the skills, have the experiences that are going to be critical in getting you to that next step in terms of your trajectory. So this entails doing research into the courses, like what courses are offered as part of that master's degree. What are the faculty who teach in that program that their research interests like closely align with yours and would be faculty that you would love the opportunity to learn from? Are there special like institutes or centers at that university that are a good fit for you? So doing this kind of like deep dive into the graduate programs, once again, it's going to help you determine like, is that the kind of master's program or like graduate program that I'm interested in anyway? But is also going to allow you to really be able to justify and rationalize why that program is the one for you. So points here for specificity. The more like you can't get too specific with these things because it shows that you've done your research and have like given some thought to this. So specificity is really important. However, I don't just want to see like when I say I'm not on the selection committee, so I'm just kind of like talking in general about when like reading applications. It's not compelling to me if I see a response. The entire thing almost looks like it was just a copy and paste job from the graduate website. Like I wouldn't want to see I wouldn't want to see it. Let's go back to the master's and let's go back. Here we go. Probably more review. An ideal response would not be that I'm applying to the Master's of Public Administration, Environmental Science and Policy because the program provides practical training, provides environmental protection, provides insight into managing organizational change and innovation, blah, blah, blah. I don't want it just to like read like almost if it was like a copy and paste job from the website. You need to take time to think about how will different components of the program be useful to you. So this entails like putting yourself in the picture. So through the MPA in Environmental Science and Policy, I will have the opportunity to, and then you actually want to do a more deeper dive than this. Okay, I might have the opportunity to participate in Columbia's Earth Institute, which includes the Earth Observatory and would allow me to do such and such. Or I would have the opportunity, and let's now like go to faculty, let's see who teachers in this program. Here we go. And I look forward to like that's what's their backgrounds here. Environmental geochemist. Probably not interested in geochemistry, but that sounds good for people who are interested in that. Probably take some time here to figure out who I'd want to like identify. But okay, perhaps you're interested in environmental sustainability ethics. So I'm applying this program. I'd have the opportunity to do research with the Earth Institute at Columbia, and I'm super interested in working with, I wouldn't say super interested, that's too colloquial. I am very excited to work with Dr. Gondek, who focuses on environmental sustainability ethics. Okay, so things like that ground your response, make it super specific, give me a really great sense that you spent some time looking at the program and have a sense of how this is going to benefit you. Okay, so putting yourself in the picture is kind of my takeaway from this one. Okay, questions about that before I move into a sample response?
Should it be the same degree for your first and second choice programs, or should you modify it slightly?
It should be a very similar degree. So I would not do like a JD and then an MPH. Like I'd be like, whoa, like what just happened? But if it was like, you know, going back to like up here, we're talking about like that environmental, like the water security interests. And in my research, I figured out that like the people who were working in water security, like some had like an MPA, some people had an MA in environmental policy. So like here, it might be possible to be like, I either hope to get an MPA focused in environmental policy, or I hope to get an MA in environmental policy. Like those could be like similar types of degrees where it makes sense and it wouldn't throw someone off. But so it can be a bit different in terms of the degrees, but you don't want it to be so different that someone's like, wait, you don't really have a sense of what you want to do. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions about that? Okay. Let's look at a response then. Okay. So this is going to be the education. So I'm going to show you a person's education response, graduate education response, and then their goals section to see And this is a great example of kind of like specificity and putting themselves in the picture. So this is the education response. Improving the urban response to displacement will require an expert understanding of global migration and its implication at the municipal level. To explore migration and inequity in this age of rapid urbanization, I intend to pursue a joint degree with an MA in International Affairs and an MS in Urban Planning. I wish to pursue this program at the Columbia School of International Public Affairs and the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. Those are like, that's the dual degree at Columbia, with concentrations in humanitarian policy and international planning. Through courses on global migration, urban planning and crises, and sustainability, I will gain the knowledge I need to implement humanitarian programs and shape urban policy. Columbia's courses on migrant rights and spatial justice reflect a commitment to social equity that I deeply appreciate. I would have the opportunity to collaborate with practitioners like Hiba Abu Akar, the leader of Columbia's Post-Conflict Cities Lab that publishes research on refugee housing in the Middle East. I could also work directly with government officials through the Development Practice Workshop, which supports international fieldwork with organizations like UNHCR. Furthermore, New York City is home to the Tent Partnership and UN Habitat, two key innovators in the study of urban migration. I'm also interested in pursuing a master's in foreign service and a master's in urban planning at Georgetown University, Georgetown's renowned Institute for the Study of Migration, emphasis on effective humanitarian response and access to advocacy NGOs, and provide similar exposure to experiential learning. At both schools, I've identified ample opportunities to gain GIS expertise, familiarity with local development initiatives, and a complex view of social impact. Moreover, the vibrant multiculturalism of New York City and DC will serve as a reminder that my program will be a platform to creating urban spaces that promote diversity and protect the rights of the marginalized. Okay, so I guess this is like added to like your question, like it was a master's in international affairs versus like, you know, the master's in foreign service, but like it's still like a very similar type of kind of like program and getting kind of the same kind of frameworks where this makes a lot of sense. So here we have, you know, the specificities of the degree. We have like what is the concentration. We have the courses this person's going to be taking. We have the fact that they're going to be collaborating with like this scholar who runs this lab there that focuses on this kind of research. Also that we're learning more about the kind of like the co-curricular aspects of this program that allows people to, through this workshop, gain international field experience. And also, I think what also can work, and this person does, is speak to the kind of location can also be valuable if there are opportunities while in that program to participate in kinds of like, you know, opportunities out in the city. Like I also think like New York University's like JD program allows like some like interesting clinics that take place in the city. So that can be something to speak about too, and is certainly valuable in terms of justifying why those particular programs. But I think this one does a really nice job of kind of like hitting all those kinds of pieces of this and still keeping themselves in the picture. Okay, questions? Any other thoughts on this? Okay, everyone's still with me? Okay, so this is the short-term goal. So this is immediately following, this is question 11. We have immediately following the graduate education. I see working within the U.S. refugee system as a crucial stepping stone to later work in global governance. I hope to oversee the implementation of U.S. refugee policy as a program officer in the State Department Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, or in the Refugee Services Division of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Serving in these offices or any of their affiliates would allow me to closely examine the American resettlement program and acquire a more sophisticated view of the international refugee regime. I will gain a deeper understanding of best practices in refugee integration and community development from a governmental perspective. My experiences in the maintenance, funding, and evaluation of various refugee housing, education, and employment programs will allow me to better inform policy decisions on refugee rights and needs later in my career. So great. We have like a sense of what is the position and in what kind of capacity that they hope to be operating. So this person mentioned like two different types of offices or bureaus. We have like the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, or in the Refugee Services Division of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And that's completely fine. You wouldn't just want to like have a list of like, I could see myself here, or I could see myself here, or I could see myself here, when I can see myself here. So you can indicate you're interested in like a couple different options that perhaps are related, but still keeping it focused around perhaps like similar type of work, or to allow you to do similar kinds of things. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important for us to understand, what is this work giving you? Not just that you're going to hold this position and this is the role that you want to have, but how is that work going to, you know, further your academic and professional development in some way, giving you some like interesting perspectives or insights or skills that's going to set the stage for the next aspect of your kind of career. And then the long-term goals of 5 to 7 years later, which 5 to 7 years later is not exactly long-term goals. So it actually kind of sounds funny that like perhaps by the time you're like 29, like you're already like the leader or something. So yes, like, okay, maybe this requires like, maybe 10 more years, but like still we need to have kind of like some ambitious like long-term goals here. So I hope to design more flexible urban environments that can mitigate migration movements precipitated by climate change and global conflict. It is my goal to be Associate Director of City Resilience Delivery for 100 Resilient Cities, a network of global cities working to build resilience to urban stresses and shocks. In this position, I will work with leaders in refugee host countries to implement city strategy plans that better integrate migrants into urban settings. Focusing on development that is environmentally sound and locally suitable, I hope to develop and deliver infrastructural, economic, and political initiatives that strengthen the municipal response to forced displacement. This experience will prepare me for a future role as the Middle East Regional Director at UN Habitat or UNHCR, where I will enhance urban refugee protection from the multilateral level. So we kind of like have like the mid near term kind of goals. Like, so this is immediate goals after graduation. And then we have like more kind of like midterm, I guess can you say that? Midterm goals. And then we have like the eventual long-term goals, still gaining a sense of like the work that they hope to be doing within this. And actually this person, I showed their policy statement last week. This is the one that was talking about the education scholarship in Jordan. And so it makes a lot of sense. I think I even included some of these goals or provided some context about the goals when talking about the policy statement. But given that they want to, think about refugee integration and like strengthen responses to forced displacement, better integrate migrants into urban settings, that proposal made a lot of sense given kind of like what the end goal was. So there's a really nice sense of cohesion between like the kind of goals, what they envision themselves doing in the future, and what kind of they were proposing to do in the policy proposal. Okay. Cohesion. What do I have here? Oh yeah. As I mentioned before, and you probably have already seen this, on like the Truman website, they have effective and unsatisfactory responses for any of these questions. And so the one I showed you about, this one you will not find there. This is our own kind of like scholars, but you can look at more kind of effective and even unsatisfactory responses on the Truman website for the graduate education piece. I don't think they have them for the future goals pieces, but they definitely have it for the graduate education question. Okay, so that's what I have. Happy to answer questions about any of this. You can either like chat them, or if you like want to unmute yourself and share your question out loud, either one is totally okay. We can also spend more time like Googling together if that's helpful. I'm open to like anything that might be of interest.
Say, Dr. Pearl, if I might hop in.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation there. One question I had was that if you know you want to possibly work, right? So I know you have 5 years to actually use the money, I believe. If you want to work for a year or two before graduate, should you note that at some point here?
No.
Great.
It's the kind of thing where you don't have to be I mean, like, this is the thing, like, people always get nervous about like creating like the plan because they're like, oh my gosh, like what happens if I like don't pursue this exact master's degree that I said that I'm going to do? Like, it really doesn't matter. Like, this is kind of just the thought experiment of what a logical plan in your field might look like that's going to get you to a position of impact. So you don't, in your graduate education section, have to be like, I think I'm going to be working like 1 or perhaps like 2 years before my graduate program. Like, this is what that would look like. No, you can just like go directly to like, this is kind of the graduate program I want to pursue, even though yes, like Truman gives you 4 years before going to graduate school, and they actually encourage people to work before going to graduate school. And that's like my general advice to you all too, is I think there's often like this sense like of momentum, like I like need to go on to like immediate kind of advanced education, but sometimes like you first need time to figure out like, is that actually what interests me? What would I get the most out of in terms of future educational experience? So yeah, you don't have to like get that kind of level of kind of granular with regards to how you're thinking about like the immediate plans, but good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have, let's see here. Okay, Googling. I have someone asked me to do some more Googling. So what are people interested in? Let's let's have a thought. Like, let's just, have a fun adventure here. What are people kind of interested in, like, thinking about? Do we have like equity people? Like, are we health people?
Can I ask a question first?
Yes, go ahead.
So so in terms of being like aiming high for your like future plans, can you also just like elaborate a little bit more about like what that looks like? Like what is too low to aim for, and like what's a good, 'cause, like a good way to be realistic while still aiming high?
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to give the examples of like the foreign service officer one and like just being being an attorney, because like that, like those are like, and this goes back to like my thing I think I mentioned in the info session, like being an educator, like being a teacher or being a doctor is like noble career and like it's super hard to get into, and like that alone is admirable. But like Truman isn't as interested in that. They're interested in who are people who are going to be thinking in more like larger scale and impactful ways about systems. So when I say like aim high, it has to be something that is going to have some sort of impact over policy or systems. And serving as a foreign service officer, you're kind of like, an officer in the bureaucracy. You're kind of like, whether you're an economic officer or political officer, like you're doing like great work, and important work, but you're not operating at the level of having influence over policy per se. So when I say aim high, it needs to be something that is clear to a reader that you are going to affect larger change in that kind of capacity that you've identified. And this is where like reading bios is kind of important, because like how they're talking about their work can give you a sense of like, is this something where I would be able to have that kind of like larger change within that kind of organization. So like, these are actually all the executive kind of positions. I'm wondering like the Nature Conservancy, if I could give you an example of this. So like being the managing director of water security for the Nature Conservancy, like that's a pretty high up position. Like, like you can just tell, and also something like that person had been the water security person. I think she'd been like already in the kind of field for 20 years to get to that point. So that's kind of like, that's going to be high up in like an international kind of like nonprofit. Would be kind of like the long-term goal here. But someone who just is kind of like communications analyst for Nature Conservancy is not going to cut it. Like that's not going to be at the level where you were like thinking about how do we have like a larger kind of influence over a particular issue, policy interventions, whatever that might be. So anyone that like an organization lists as like an issue expert or like regional leadership, executive leadership, like for in terms of like the Nature Conservancy as an environmental nonprofit, that would be like fair game. So I don't know if that like entirely answers your question, but that would be kind of like my like metric of determining if that's like aiming high enough.
Yeah, that definitely gives me a better idea. Thank you.
The one thing I'm thinking about this, the one thing I'd be cautious of is naming a long-term position that is presidentially appointed. Because like you don't have as much control over that. So I would be very cautious. It's not going to be as compelling to say like, I wanted to be the ambassador to the UK. Like, okay, like great. Like I'm glad like that's your goal, but like that's more of kind of like a political maneuvering type of thing rather than like I'm building up expertise to get to that position. So I would avoid anything that's like presidentially appointed in order to have that position. Like being the head of Department of Education, if you were like really inspired to be like head of Department of Education, like okay. But like any kind of like ambassador role, I would be very cautious about that. Okay, so I have another question. Clarify the 5 to 7 years later question. Would it be all right to actually write about that as though it's the long-term end goal or top position you're hoping to work in, or is it more beneficial to approach it as a midterm goal, realistic 5 to 7 year response? Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, that plan 5 to 7 years later, it's actually kind of tricky because there's almost an expectation here that you are doing both the midterm and the long-term goal. So yes, it's kind of weird because it almost just reads like, what will you be doing when you're like age 29 or 30? but I would do both. I would have kind of like, so you have your immediate goals here. I would have like a middle, like kind of near term, more near term, but still kind of like, you know, years out. And then I would do the ultimate goal at the very end. So this is almost like a 3-stage thing. Immediate, midterm, near term-ish, long term is how I would organize that kind of trajectory. Okay. Other questions before we just start doing more Googling? So like, I know like I probably have people who are interested in like issues regarding like health equity or educational equity. Like I also like do this kind of work too. Like there's Department of Health Equity and Excellence in what? I don't know what that is. DC. Let's see here. So I've looked at this before. It was clearly if you were interested in public health, you know, go to like the Department of Health for like your state or like DC. There are all of these kinds of like offices within that, centers. There's the Community Health Administration, there's the Office of Health Equity. So you might be like generally interested that you're kind of like doing like work that's speaking to disproportionate access to quality healthcare, or is thinking about social determinants of health. Doing some work like thinking about like what does this office do? It's going to tell you who the like leaders of the office are, like the biography of this person who has a PhD, MD. So that's also kind of a good indication here, and where she came from previously. But I could like spend, you know, just hours like probably like looking people up. Center for Policy Planning and Evaluation, like the biography here. But once again, it gives you like language to use to talk about like kind of what your kind of future looks like too. So this is all really great. And also is probably content for policy interventions if you haven't yet thought them through, because there are like reports here, like this is going to be like, you know, more like kind of federal, state, like local agencies, but they're going to be reports that are going to talk about like gaps that they've identified, and perhaps like you come up with a policy intervention if that's the kind of space you want to work in, that's speaking to some of the gaps like a recent report has identified. And that like showcases that you're like very familiar with what's happening, you understand the context, and it's totally in line with that kind of like future work that you would be doing in the future. So like, once again, this is all to emphasize you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. It's kind of just like finding the content, but like go out and like, you know, find this kind of content. So like, I'm getting the sense from doing this work that the people who lead these offices for the DC Department of Health have like PhDs. So, you know, I'm like getting closer to evaluating, is that the kind of the direction I see myself in? Or if like I already know right now, I really don't want to get a PhD, then probably being the person who's in charge of kind of like research for the Department of Health is not going to be the best fit. And then that's kind of like, you know, the things that you realize you don't want to do are just as valuable as the things that you realize you do want to do. It's always like kind of a process of elimination and getting closer to kind of like the things that interest you the most. Okay. Like, let's think like legal defense funds. Yeah, like let's see who works for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund about staff. Okay, here we have their leadership. This is like not as helpful. You have to like click into people's. But yeah, like this is so much content about like what this person has done. Oh, a Fulbright scholar. Everyone should apply to Fulbright. And this also might give you ideas of like where to potentially like look at for your programs too. Check out UCLA School of Law to see what interests you. Like Stanford also has really cool like programs related to criminal justice, like and like has some cool dual degree programs too. JD, like they have like now I'm kind of like going off, you know, my talking points here, but this could also give you ideas. Like Stanford has some really cool dual degree programs if you were interested in, where is it? Going kind of law route. joint degree, here we go. JD Masters, JD MD, Masters, let's see here. Where are the options? I'd have to click into this to do this. But anyway, okay, now I'm going like off the rails here. Any other questions? Okay. If the grad school goals you want to write about are similar to one of the example answers that Truman provides, should you change them around? So if we're talking about like on the website, like one of the ones like Truman lists, like let's go to Truman. .gov. I wouldn't like change kind of like your trajectory just because like that's already kind of represented, because like there are always going to be like a lot of people, for instance, applying to Truman who are interested in say like civil rights issues or interested in kind of like public health issues. Like that's always going to be the same. So I wouldn't like feel like you can't talk about something just because it's represented on the Truman website. You just can't obviously be plagiarizing what someone else wrote. So it might give you ideas for perhaps like programs that you're interested in going to, but you cannot obviously like take, and this is actually why I probably wouldn't like even look at these, because sometimes like when you look at these kinds of, and actually I'm showing you examples, so it's kind of like doing exactly what I told you not to do. But sometimes when you look at these responses and you think like that's like the only way that I could potentially talk about a program. Perhaps if you see one of the programs here that you're interested in, it's always like once you see something, it's like so hard to kind of like redo it. So you might just kind of like avoid like looking at these responses and just know that you need to get to the level of specificity. So you're not like kind of tempted to be like, oh, that's exactly how I would describe it too, to include in your own responses. Okay, I have another question here. What's this? Internal committee that reviews a resume and the application prefer 1 to 2 pages. I know it says max 2, but I just wasn't sure that was preferable. Okay, so just as like a heads up life tip, your resume should never include like half pages. So you either have like 1 full page or 2 full pages. It looks like a resume has not really been thought out or put together properly if it's like 1.5 pages, just like FYI. I know no one ever tells you these things. And this is why I want to do like a pop-up workshop on the resume. I think it's good to have, 2 pages if you can, but of course, like you don't want to just be like including random things from like middle school and high school just to get 2 pages. I guess I'll like just kind of like start talking briefly about the resume, and I'll do like more detail on this later. A resume is a curation of your experience according to the criteria that the opportunity you're applying to is looking for. So there's a difference between like a resume that you might be using for a fellowship application versus a job. Like a job is going to have like a professional experience section, or like perhaps you're applying to kind of like a policy internship, you might have like a policy kind of section. A fellowship application, you want to think about like, what does the thing I'm applying to care about, and how can I curate my experiences accordingly? So for a Truman resume, you might have like a leadership and community engagement section. Or you might have like, I don't know, a research section if you've done like research related to your issue that you want to include. So you kind of want to think about like, what are the kinds of dimensions of my candidacy that I think are important to highlight, and how can I organize my experiences accordingly? Just as a FYI, you never want to have super weak verbs in your resume like participated in, helped, served, what are the other ones? Assisted, helped, served, participated in. That doesn't tell me anything. Because if you assisted someone, I'm like, what does that mean? Did you like organize a program, or did you just like answer an email? Like what does assisted can run like the full gamut of what that means. So you always need to be as specific and precise as possible with how you are describing your experiences. So if you are tempted to write assisted with conference planning, I would ask you, what exactly did you do in conference planning? Were you the person responsible for securing speakers? In which case that bullet point, rather than saying assisted with conference planning, would say secured 5 speakers for an event focusing on national security, covering range of topics. As a reader, I have a much better sense of what your kind of contributions were with that kind of bullet point than one that says just like assisted or helped, which is a super weak verb, which doesn't give me a sense of what you did. And just as a FYI, Wellesley active verbs. I love this list, okay? Wellesley College has an amazing list of active verbs to use in your resume divided by category. So perhaps you're there and you're like, oh my gosh, I've used like managed like 5 times. Like, how do I use another word besides managed? Well, you can go to like the managed leadership skills section and be like, are one of these words like a really precise way of talking about what I want to talk about? So anyway, so this is really great. A really great list. I would highly recommend using this. I use this all the time. So the Wellesley College action verbs for resumes list. Got a little like bonus content here, guys, beyond like the graduate education and career goals. Okay, any other final questions before we close? Are we all good?